right. Hello, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. So it is my pleasure today to introduce you to Jesse Reed. Jesse is a graphic designer and entrepreneur who has co-founded 5 businesses without ever being formally educated in business. Most recently, he is the co-founder of Order, a design office that specializes in brand identity, where he leads a team to develop branding systems for many recognizable institutions like MoMA, Apple, Google, and Herman Miller. In addition to Order, Jesse is known for co-founding Standards Manual, which is an independent publisher dedicated to preserving graphic design history. They famously got started making use of crowdfunding through Kickstarter and an app like Shopify. They were able to use this funding to publish fascinating and important histories about iconic graphic standards deployed by the New York City Transit Authority and NASA. This year's theme for the lecture series has been exploring the topic of truth in contemporary society. I personally feel especially drawn to how Jesse's work on the Standards Manual and iconic branding for recognizable institutions directly engages the graphic systems that prevail in our everyday environments and media. So on that note, I would like to welcome Jesse Reed.
Let's see. All right. This is working? Should I put it higher? Can we hear? It's good? Okay. Let me know if it starts to get quiet, but my voice projects. And why don't I just plug in the laptop? That might help. Nice. I'm sorry this isn't orange. I just realized that right now, that should have been a different color. But yeah, thank you very much, Julie, for the introduction. And yeah, thanks everyone for attending. I know it's Monday evening and after classes, so I'm sure you're tired, but I appreciate it. So yeah, I'm Jesse Reed. I am originally from Ohio, so just to give you some background on who I am. But currently, I've been living in Brooklyn for the past 15 years, so I guess this is technically where I call home. This is where I'm coming from today. And you know, when I got asked to do this talk, I just sort of say yes to things, and then months later, someone emails me and said, "Oh yeah, what are you going to talk about?" And to be honest, I didn't have a sort of topic in mind when I said yes, but you know, within a few minutes, I was like, okay, I think I could probably, you know, come up with something. And so what I replied back to that email with was essentially this: so building design businesses out of necessity. So like Julie mentioned, I have a few of them, and you know, I didn't go to business school. I don't have any proper training, and I guess what I mean by necessity, I mean, starting any of these businesses, you know, what is really necessary? I think this word can mean a lot of different things. For me, it really just meant that in one way or another, an opportunity was presented to me or presented itself, and it seemed like a good idea at the time to move forward and start some sort of company out of it. As you'll see in a moment, I'm interested in business, and I just like the idea of sort of a transport of goods and services from one person to another. So there's just an inherent interest that I have in business without going to school for it. So today I'm going to talk about the 5 different companies that currently I'm a part of. They consist of a product, and when I say that, and to sort of clarify, I don't mean software. I think now product design, you know, means software, but I mean a physical product. Book publishing, design and typography, as well as software, which is maybe the sorry, is this feeding back? Or is it okay for you guys? Okay, I have an echo here. Anyway, so like a product, software in the maybe modern sense of the term. So I had to start somewhere. So here's, you know, a little bit of context for where I began this journey of starting businesses. So like I said, I'm from Ohio. Specifically, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio. It's northeast Ohio, sort of near Cleveland, Akron, if anyone is familiar with the States. This is what my bedroom looked like when I was growing up. So literally, there was not an inch of it that was not covered in something. So stickers, posters, just a bunch of, stuff that I became interested in collecting. Jones soda bottles, if anyone sort of remembers those. I had a pretty big collection of that, drums, etc. So as you can see, in one way or another, I was really fascinated by and interested in skateboarding, and then the brands that I was wearing T-shirts of and buying products of. And so this is really what, unbeknownst to me, started my interest, I think, in graphic design. And if I look back at it, I mean, there are some pretty interesting marks, like that sort of blue geometric square, sort of the E with the triangle. I mean, those might be logos that I actually designed today. The other ones are a little bit more illustrative. But nonetheless, not knowing that this was called graphic design, I was really fascinated in them and wanted to somehow do or be a part of it in one way or the other. So actually, I was really bad at skateboarding. And so instead I thought, why don't I start my own skateboard company and sponsor my friends, and I can be the one that sort of gives my friends boards and shirts and hats. And so this all started with a $200 loan from my mom. She might be calling in or viewing in from the live stream. So hi, Mom. Thank you for the $200. And so I started a company called Nebulize Skateboards. I got these fonts on dafont.com for free, and I typeset them in Microsoft Word, and then printed them out, and then physically took them to a printer, and they somehow made a screen print out of it and printed these shirts. So, because I was terrible at actually skateboarding, I thought, maybe this is something that I could do. And so, this was not mind-blowing. I think I was like 13 years old and too young to understand or to even think in that way. But it was kind of amazing to me that I could go on the computer, print something out, and then it was on a shirt, it was on a skateboard, and you could actually produce something from this very initial idea that you may have had, even a concept. It wasn't even anything planned out too far ahead of time. So, this was a stencil that I just stenciled on skateboards to make it look like it was silkscreened. It was pretty crude, but it just showed me that you could produce something if you had an idea to do it. One more embarrassing photo of myself, which is that I joined a band in high school, like maybe, I don't know, a few high schoolers out there. The great thing about being in a band is that then you have the opportunity to make things like flyers and merch and all that sort of stuff. And this just shows my ignorance in knowing design programs. So again, Microsoft Word on the right. The left are literally stickers that are taped on a sheet of paper. And then the text is from a separate piece of paper that I cut out, taped, and then photocopied the whole thing. So, now this is like punk and sort of cool, and it looks like distress, but it was clearly just me not knowing how to really make it. So quite the contrast. Then I went to college. I went to the University of Cincinnati, and while I had an interest sort of on the periphery of graphic design without knowing that it was a profession, I was then introduced to things like Armin Hoffman's graphic design manual, or John Massey's posters, and Tomoko Miho for the Container Corporation of America. And for whatever reason, although this aesthetically is the opposite of what my bedroom looked like at 13, there was something about it. I wouldn't even have used the words, simplicity and modern and all and minimal. Just for whatever reason, the sort of reduction of information was capturing to me. So when I was in school, some of the work that I did was essentially just trying to be Joseph Mueller Brockman or Paul Rand or, you name it, from that sort of era of an international style. I just tried to reduce down things as much as possible. So these were for symbols that were going into a healthcare scenario for non-English speaking visitors. So how could you communicate those ideas? And then my thesis project, like sort of a ridiculous thing to take on, but I was proposing to redesign the New York City subway system. But knowing now where my career has gone, it's sort of amazing to see the connection and how this actually maybe influenced what then came next. So that was all the background and sort of the pre-professional life of starting businesses, I guess officially, that I had. And so after school, these are the literal 3 suitcases that I had with me, and I moved to New York City in 2010. My first job was at the Museum of Modern Art. Hopefully, if you've all been to New York, you have visited. I worked under Julia Hoffman, who was the art director at the time. This system was developed by Paula Scher at Pentagram, so I was sort of the initial team that got to really implement that entire system. And our team was responsible for things outside of the museum, like advertising and marketing, as well as the identities of the shows inside of the museum. And so it was at MoMA, and I'm not going to go really any further into that work than this, but I sort of had a lightning bulb moments that I think most entrepreneurs or inventors or people that just have created something have. And this sort of then led me to develop this first product that I'm briefly going to talk about. It's not too long. That just dealt with Pantone chips. So for the graphic designers in the room, I think we definitely know what these are. Other design professions, architecture, I think we're all aware what Pantone is. Printing, sadly on the decline, but at the time and at MoMA, we printed a lot. So constantly using Pantone chips for exhibitions and for marketing. And if you had a book of these Pantone chips, you only could really store them in a coffee mug or an envelope. This is sort of like a fake photo. I wanted to find the real photo of like the envelope spilling out of Pantone chips that we really had, but it was choosing colors, and at this moment that I thought there must be a better way to organize all of these chips that are very specifically coded with numbers and colors, like there's a real codex to it. Certainly there's a better way than just putting them in a mug. And so I very crudely did a sketch of rows and columns of what I thought could basically be like a sheet for like baseball cards, but for little tiny paper chips, and be a better way to organize these PMS colors. And so I have no background in product design or industrial design, but I just figured, this is a flat surface, just like a book or a website. How hard could it be to sort of figure this out? And so I Googled vinyl manufacturer, New York. I found one in Boston. But they helped me make this. I didn't make that CAD drawing, but they sort of took my sketch, turned it into that, and then did a first prototype. You'll notice that this is the actual first prototype, and that the sleeves are actually quite tall. And what I found when I did this is that they went in really easily, but getting them out was very difficult. So I had to make some modifications. But then ultimately I created this company called, I wanted it to be called Slip, but then it sort of just came into Chip Slip. This originally meant sleeves for your chips, but it's a hard word to sort of own. So Chip Slip is more or less what the company is now called, and this is the final product. So you can sort of see that little window, the sort of clear area is much lower, so you can take those out much more easier once they're inside the book. And so that was created, in 2010. Not to sort of jump around on the timeline, but in 2017, Pantone approached me and wanted to make it an official Pantone product. So now any book of Pantone chips that you buy, one of these sheets are in every single one. And the deal was basically I was the only place that you could then rebuy more of them without any sort of royalties or anything like that. So it's, it was a pretty good deal. So now, this product is out there on the market, and at least I can say I sort of, created something that was physical and not just digital. So that was the first one. And then, from MoMA, I then had a career shift. In school, I did intern at Pentagram, I think for my senior year. And so while working at MoMA, my old boss, who I interned for, Michael Bierut, he contacted me and said there was a position open. Would I like to come interview? And I sort of jumped at that opportunity. And so I, luckily landed that position as a designer on his team in the New York office of Pentagram. So was at MoMA for a year and a half, went to Pentagram, ultimately would spend about 5.5 years there. And some of the work that I did was, similar to MoMA, I guess, but it was not for one single brand. And so on Michael's team, we worked for, an array of different clients, from financial institutions to department stores, banks, art museums, cities, you name it. And it was great because every single job was completely different. I learned something new every single time. I mean, Michael sort of has this quote that being a designer is like being a spy, because I have no job, being in Saks Fifth Avenue or going into M&T Bank or any of these places beyond they need graphic design help, and I can do that for them. So a few of those other projects, included things like universities, another orange and white school, but we won't look at this for too long. But Syracuse University, got to work on some restaurants. This one was opened by Bobby Flay, if anyone's a Bobby Flay fan. This might be one of the most popular projects I ever worked on at Pentagram, but it was for the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. They just said, we need signs to have people's dogs stop pooping on our lawn. We pitched this sort of like in a cheeky way, and it got approved first round. It was in production a week later, kind of incredible. So it was then at Pentagram that, not maybe lightning striking, but we found an artifact that was quite exciting called the New York City Transit Authority. And this is where sort of the next chapter of the business takes play. We found this manual in the basement of Pentagram. I'm not going to give you sort of the full story, but essentially it's a very rare document, one that you can only see in MoMA or other museums or private collections. Because it was in such good shape, me and the other designers around, we just wanted to share this with other designers, maybe people that were interested, and then me, another designer on the team, Hamish Smythe, we sort of took it upon ourselves to photograph it and then simply make a website. So this website became quite popular. It got 250,000 hits in the first sort of week of us publishing it. So we knew there was some interest, at least, in the subject matter. And then about a year later, we did the website, time went on, nothing really progressed from there. We sort of loosely said it'd be so great to have that binder as a reissued book. And so then someone mentioned, oh, you should just use Kickstarter. And then, in 2014, Kickstarter was sort of at its peak, or at least in its infancy, that it was very popular. Everyone was using it that wanted to fund an idea. And so we decided to do that. The MTA was our client at the time at Pentagram, and so we had access to them to ask for permission. They said, sure, go for it. And so we decided that's what we would do. For the sake of time, I'm going to show the video that we launched the Kickstarter with. I might end it slightly early, but I think it's actually much better told and from our boss himself, Michael. He graciously offered up to be the narrator of this. This sort of sets the stage for what the project really was. So I'll play this for a little bit and maybe skip ahead if it's getting lengthy.
New York City is a chaotic place, and in the 1960s, no place was more chaotic than the New York City subway system. If you went down to the subways in the mid-60s, what you'd encounter is this profusion of signs that were completely inconsistent, not just inconsistent graphically, but inconsistent in terms of the way they described things, where they were placed, how they were made. You didn't know where to look, you didn't know where to go. And I think a lot of people were sort of convinced that that's the way it had to be. New York's a complicated place, figure it out. The MTA had the idea in 1966 of remedying this, and what they did was they hired a firm called Unimark, and two designers at Unimark, Massimo Vignelli and Bob Norda, took it upon themselves to untangle this mess. And the result was a signage system that they proposed that they worked on for 4 years, and finally in 1970 encapsulated in a single document a manual that described effectively how every sign in the New York subway system would look. If you get on the New York subway system today, the signs you see, more or less, faithfully and down to every detail, follow the precepts that Norda and Vignelli set out so many years ago. document is fascinating to us today for many reasons. One, it sort of is, you're being shown the instruction manual to this incomprehensibly complicated system. And the fact that it all captured between two covers, and I mean completely captured between two covers, is a remarkable feat. If you're used to riding the New York City subway and you sort of just see that there's a code that has actually directed you to every train you've ever stepped on, and you can hold that code in your hand, it seems almost like a miracle even today. It's also an amazing feat of logical analysis. What Unimark, what Vignelli and Norda had to do this work wasn't simply just taking a bunch of signs that looked crummy and change them so they look nice. What they had to do was this step-by-step, decision-by-decision analysis of how people actually use the subway. It's so detailed and yet so simple. At the end of the day, it looks like a bizarre world children's storybook, you know, where the stories are all about the numbers of the subway. It has this kind of simple, almost kindergarten level clarity to it that, combined with the enormous sophistication of the analysis that underlies it, creates this document that, for my money, has never really been duplicated since. In the end, though, I think what makes this document so great is that, I'd say inadvertently, it's astonishingly beautiful. It's just simply a beautiful piece of modern design.
So he says it best. I can't be as poetic as he is describing these things. But, that video was the start of, really so many things, but definitely the future of what will become, a publishing company. And so we launched the Kickstarter. Our goal was $108,000, and we ended up raising $800,000, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but essentially that just meant we sold a lot more books than initially planned, which is a little under 7,000. So we thought this was going to be a one-off project. If anyone here doesn't or isn't, has never been exposed to how a book is made, this is what it looks like. So we went to Italy. That's where we printed the books. This is called going on press. You basically do proof checks and quality control before a book is a book. It looks like this. It's just a bunch of huge sheets of paper on stacked on top of one another on pallets before it gets trimmed and bound and then made into the final product. So this was sort of, again, like an equivalent to setting, fonts that I downloaded for free and putting them on a t-shirt, and wow, it's a real thing. The same thing was here. We took photographs of a old manual, we made a website, we pitched it to a bunch of people, they wanted it, and now look, it's real. So, this is the final product, and, definitely the most rewarding experience, sort of seeing the idea come to fruition from what we thought would be interesting, excuse me, for a few hundred people to several thousand. So we could get real nerdy about this. It had 3 different paper stocks. It had 9 different Pantone spot colors. Speaking of, there you go. And printed 1-to-1 scale from the actual original manual at an incredibly high resolution sort of print quality. So that was not us starting a company. That was, let's just do this one project, call it a day, and be done with it. But really, it turned into something much more as we started to think, how far could this go? So initially, it still is, 2 co-founders, no investors, no employees, and 0 business plan. So nothing was thought of beyond, let's make a book. But then it did become, this also weird name for a company called Standards Manual. When I tell it to people, they're like, what is that name? It just is what it is, right? Like, literally. So then people kept on suggesting you should do more, and there's this book for the NASA identity. I've heard there may be some people in this room that have one. And so we just found who designed it. His name was Richard Daney, that gentleman on the left. He lived in Napa, California. We basically sent him an email saying, hey, we printed the Vignelli manual last year. We'd love to do the same with yours. Are you interested? And within 30 minutes, he emailed back saying, I've been waiting for your call. He flew to New York, this is a real story, the next week and gave us his personal copy of the manual. We started scanning it, and then we did the same thing. So with the video, I'm not going to show it to you, it's just too long, but you can see it online. We did basically the same thing we did for the Transit Authority, but for NASA. We did a Kickstarter. This time, we almost raised $1 million, almost got there. But again, it was just we sold about 10,000 books instead of 7,000. So here was the final product, and we always try to do something a little bit interesting with the production. It was sort of in this silver metallic space food bag, and same deal. It's 1-to-1 scale. Every single page of the manual scanned at very high resolution, and really this is meant to be an educational tool, especially how they were written. They're so specific and authoritative that when you're really handing off a brand that large, you have to be so detailed so that no mistake goes overlooked, or so that people are instructed very specifically how to make something. That sort of design writing, we thought, it was sort of, becoming extinct. And so the writing was a really major component of what we wanted to show off. So then eventually, and to sort of then progress the imprint itself, we started to produce books that weren't just standards manuals, but maybe more traditional design books. And so this book was for an agency called Chermayeff and Geismar. That's Ivan Chermayeff on the left and Tom Geismar on the right. If you don't know their names, you definitely know the work that they've done. Chase Bank, NBC, PBS, Pan Am. So they were having a 60-year anniversary of the company existing, now with a third partner, Sagi Haviv, so Chermayeff, Geismar, and Haviv. And they asked us to both design and publish their 60-year monograph. So it was a huge honor. When I was in your seats in school, they were who I studied. And so being asked by them directly to design and publish their work was an incredible honor. So work that maybe people haven't seen for Mobile Gas. They developed a whole typeface, the Pan Am work that maybe younger generations don't remember. NBC, I think we all know that. And then furthermore, we started then to publish, collections of design ephemera. So this is a book all on U.S. national park maps, starting in 1916, from when the parks were originally developed, all the way through to the 90s and 2000s. And so, as you can see, this is not a manual. It's not a single source of work from a particular designer or firm. It's really a collection and more a historical lens of graphic design through the eye of the national parks. And all of these, unfortunately, are not credited by the designers who did them, but at least now they're being seen and studied and not getting lost forever. Famously, obviously, you can tell we're fans of Massimo Vignelli, but sort of just naturally found that he and his firm also developed eventually what's called the Unigrid for the National Park Service, where what would have been one-off pieces were then standardized into one format, which is more or less also what you see today. So quite a parallel to the New York City subway system and their standardization. So I'm not going to go through every book, but our latest two books also came back to where we started, a style guide for DC Comics for any comic fans in the room, and then a second edition of the Parks book. So these are all of the books we've done to date. We have one more coming out in May for a very large beverage company that will be announced very soon. So to date, we're still 100% independent. We do direct-to-consumer sales as well as our own wholesale distribution. And then in the UK, we have global distribution by Thames and Hudson. And yeah, this is still something that we're going to continue developing for the foreseeable future. So, again, we keep on going back in time, but around 2016, Hamish sort of said to me, I think I'm going to leave Pentagram. And, I was sort of ready to do the same thing at the time. And so this then began a journey to develop our own design practice that, definitely had roots in what we learned in Pentagram, but now could sort of do it ourselves. And so, the question really is why leave such a great job and position? And I think some of those answers were we were associate partners at the time. That's the highest level you can really move up to besides becoming a partner. We had some difficult clients. Our risk tolerance was pretty high. We were both without children or partners. We were just sort of, we were 29, and so our risk, we sort of figured if this all fails, we can just crawl back to Michael and get our jobs back. But we had learned a ton, so we both felt very, ready to go out and start something on our own and really have our own point of view. So same two co-founders. We didn't have any clients, but we did have an accountant and a lawyer. So if you're starting a company, those are two very important people to have on your side. We thought of the name while walking in a park in Atlanta, Georgia, speaking at a conference one day. Somehow this name was not taken, but we thought of the name Order, just sort of thinking about what is it about design that we really like to do and sort of do most, I think, put structure to things. I mean, I assume there's some architects in this room. Not that we're not, I think graphic designers are wannabe architects to some degree, or like we are at least. I think like it's sort of like a world that we cannot even comprehend. But so, just creating order, structure, foundations, that sort of got us really excited. So, that's when Order was born. So we didn't have clients, but we had business cards, so it makes you look like you have clients. We very specifically wanted to create an office space and build it out ourselves. And so on the right, these are some very crude drawings of what that office space could look like. Same with that chip slip drawing, turning it into an actual CAD drawing. We did not do this, but hired a friend who was an architect to draw some real floor plans for the space. We found a space. This is me looking like, how is this ever going to become what we think it's going to become? But it did. And so, we just built out a very simple office space, really just putting in furniture, some sliding glass doors, and we opened up Order in Greenpoint, Brooklyn in 2017. The nice thing was, and we always had this idea from the beginning, is that we could have a little storefront to sell standards manuals, the books that we published, sort of as a part of it. And then on top of that, we then started releasing or sort of selling other graphic design books. And as far as I know, we're still New York City's only graphic design bookstore for only that subject matter in and of itself. So who Order is, myself, I'm the managing partner. We have a head of operations, a design director, and 2 designers. This is some of our work. Funny enough, Kickstarter was one of our first clients, going real full circle, developing a new brand system for them. We work with a lot of startups that no one has heard of, or we'll work with systems that a lot of people have heard of. So this is for the digital wayfinding in Washington, D.C. Some local companies. This is for basically a payroll provider that we use called JustWorks. And in this one, I'll talk a little bit later, very typographically driven, essentially a custom typeface as the identity. Some pro bono work that we do for the state of New York when early voting was passed. And then for a conference by the company Notion, if anyone's a Notion user here. So I'm going to show 2 case studies, somewhat longer than those single pages, but not too long. So many full circle moments here. The Museum of Modern Art, the place where I started my career, then came back to us and said, we're expanding the museum and we really want to redefine what our identity is when we open back up. And so they were physically adding on 40,000 square feet of gallery space to the museum. At the same time, they were going from this strategy of highlighting one exhibition at a time to a whole season, and so a summer season, spring season, winter, etc. So we needed to figure out how to do that without it being confusing or overwhelming. One thing that we very simply did is they had this typeface based on MoMA Gothic called MoMA Sans. It had 16 different weights to it, and we just said, just use one of them all the time, and it'll make your life a lot easier. And it really was the historically known, typeface of MoMA, the sort of bolder weight of it. And then we developed this modular system where they could begin to put together the season almost ahead of time. So all the different shows, all the different messaging for membership, et cetera, lectures, performances, and almost think about it diagrammatically, where you could just stack these things on top of one another and then sort of splice out what you needed depending on the context and time. So I think there's an animation, hopefully this isn't too loud, that will show what this looks like. So the system essentially, and again, I could do a whole hour just on this project, but it shows the entire season vertically, and then at moments where it needs to expand on a show or a performance or lecture, it moves things horizontally. So you sort of get this XY axis that reveals different things going on at the museum at certain times, and then as you can see, you can go in, you can go out, you can focus in, you can sort of include many things. It's a really flexible system to allow you to do many things all at once, and really to show that there's so much going on within a single season that we can't quite possibly fit it into one ad. You can do the same thing with just one show and show multiple pieces of work if you wanted to, so it really worked on multiple levels. And then of course there's evergreen things like Vans shoes and water bottles and t-shirts that applied the same system. So this was, personally a gratifying and rewarding job for me, just going back to the place that I started. And we thought that was like the most modern client we could possibly, literally just dealing with the genre of modernism, which clearly we have an interest in, or so we thought. And so then we were approached by a furniture company based out of Michigan that was, for a period of time mostly known for corporate offices and furniture that really sort of systematically reimagined how office life could be. Very famously, releasing chairs by Charles and Ray Eames. I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with this couple. So I'm talking about Herman Miller. So they approached us with this sort of, pivot in the company where they wanted to move beyond just the office and the corporate landscape, but really move back into people's homes in the idea that expression and personality was at the forefront of, a lot of the design work developed by incredible designers like the Eameses and many others in their roster of product designers. So, this was about a year-long project, and again, we deal a lot with historical sort of archives and looking back before we look forward. And so they had a lot to work with. The brand, has been sort of going strong for, many, many decades. And so we looked back at the archive and really started to see, well, what are the consistent pieces of this that we don't want to leave behind, but that we can sort of transform and move into the next era of the company. And what we found were sort of a lot of consistencies. One being sort of the M sort of symbol, as you can see there, where at times was used very much as an M within the word, but then also pulled out, used rather expressively. And really it was an expressive brand. It really had so much character to it. So the first thing that we wanted to do was preserve that symbol, not get rid of it, not change it, but sort of break it out of its shell a little bit and give it some more life. So we really just cleaned up the typography. We gave it a new typeface, which was a reference to the 70s era of the company, which was spearheaded by John Massey. So one of those posters that I referenced very early on that I was, educated by when I was in college, and really just, sort of transformed it as, an evolution, not really anything revolutionary. So the new typeface that we developed is sort of an extension of Helvetica called Sune, designed by Klim in New Zealand. And really this allowed them to focus on how the brand would be expressed. So you could still do things that were rather quiet and reserved, or you could add 10 more colors to things and be loud, expressive, and engaging, and then everywhere sort of in between. So it's not like we're adding anything totally, sort of disruptive to the brand. You still recognize it as the brand you maybe once knew, but now it's just sort of solidifying its place in the modernist canon and what they developed and being known for truly the number one, modern furniture company. So, then you can just do a lot of things with typography, color, and symbols that can go quite a long way. And really just showcasing the furniture. You don't really need to do much with a company like this because the focus is not on graphic design. The focus is really on the product itself. I think, since probably the 70s, they then re-released their magazine, and so the entire identity, yes, we make a cameo in there. So, this was a launch of the brand and the launch of the re-release of the magazine also itself. And then motion had quite a lot to do with bringing the identity to life. And so previously, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, nothing really moved. And so just adding a motion language with all those components that we developed, again, it's familiar. I recognize this company, but it's something new, fresh, and maybe more for the person who's decorating their home and not sort of a cubicle-filled office building. So another dream come true, definitely for the office. So that was Order, the design agency. In 2022, this was sort of mid-pandemic. Things weren't that great. Jobs were coming in a little bit slower, so we just thought, what else should we do with our time? And so I posed the question, well, we deal a lot with type. Should we just start a Type Foundry? Why not, right? Yeah, so why? Why should we start this? And, at first, the answer really was, why not? We can just do it and have some fun with it, which is still true, but I think really the reason is because we believe strongly that type is or can be identity, and we develop identities for a living. That project I very quickly showed at the beginning of sort of Order's section, JustWorks. This was maybe the first or one of the first projects that we pitched the idea of doing a custom typeface very much from the start, and so they were bought into that idea before we even began. The short version of this is the company used to be called Clockwork before they named the company JustWorks, and so we looked at references of old clock mechanism manuals from the earliest late 19th century, early 20th century, and found all these references to this very low to high contrast grotesque typeface that we thought, even if no one knows it, there's a direct relationship back to the Clockwork name and into the real informational structural business that JustWorks is, which again is compliance, payroll, just business administration. There's not a lot of, sexy graphic design to be done, but there's a lot of information to be, said and told. And so the whole identity is just based really around this one typeface, which is called Oatly, a reference back to the founder's name. And the guidelines then is purely a typographic manual. I mean, there's colors and there's things on how to combine type with color and then different devices like underlines, but it really is just a purely typographic identity. So we did this in collaboration with Colophon Type Foundry out in the UK. Then a couple years later, a very talented designer named Emily Claby joined our team out in Portland. We had a client named Chatham Blanket that produced wool blankets. And again, this was sort of a family company that a younger generation of that family revived and was going to start to relaunch their products. And so they had about 100 years worth of history to look at. And what we noticed was that they wrote their name the same way in this very condensed slab serif over and over again. I mean, there were other things that were included, but this was the consistent sort of voice. Same with Herman Miller. That M was sort of the consistent piece that we didn't want to lose. This type approach was the same thing. And so we started with just redrawing the name of the company to fit better in applications like embroidery and things that actually needed to be, functional on the project itself. But then we thought, well, we can just design this maybe ourselves. So Emily is a type designer as well as a graphic designer. So she just took it upon herself to extend the letters in the logo into a full alphabet. So then we thought, okay, we can do this for clients. We can sell books on the internet. If we can do that, I think we could also sell fonts. So at this time, we started to become aware of other younger type designers who were designing typefaces and then doing nothing with them. They weren't selling them. They weren't going anywhere. So Benjamin Tuttle was one of those designers, an incredible type designer who was sitting on about 6 or 8 different typefaces that weren't released. Emily herself, she was designing typefaces, in various ways that also, at this moment, weren't being released or going anywhere. So then we thought, well, let's just start, a Notion doc and think about, well, if, between the both of you, we could probably release, a couple typefaces to start. Let's just see how we can do it. So it started with just, a pure, almost, black and white document of what we thought maybe could be released to the public. Here's where we learned and gained a lot of knowledge from, an add to cart button for a book can be the same thing for a typeface, and really applied the same knowledge. So then I tasked Emily with basically starting this Type Foundry. So she sort of went all in. I think I asked her just to create like one block that can go on our website that you can buy fonts from. She opened up Figma, designed a whole sort of section of the website that had specimens and type testers and a whole, sort of checkout sort of portion of the website. So we worked with our developer to make that happen, and the Type Foundry was created. And it really had similar goals to Order itself, which was always having some sort of historical approach. We wanted to support the next generation of type designers, and it was a purely fun project. Like, we were the client, no one was sort of telling us what to do. So speaking of fun, just for the pure reason that our office has 2 dogs associated with our staff, we created a symbol with the both of them as our mascot for the Type Foundry, Frank and Penny. The first 2 releases were Plebeian and Pastiche Grotesque, both designed by Ben Tuttle. And because, graphic designers like to make things just for the sake of it, this typeface had 5 different weights, and so we thought it would be a fun way to sort of show this off, just instead of doing a traditional specimen, but to actually make these, fake projects out of them, and a little bit more captivating than just a poster with an A to Z on it. So we did that for all and sort of currently what we do for all the typefaces. We have, a full alphabet. Sometimes there's a Roman and italics, and then we just decide to make sort of a fake client out of it and have some fun. So this one was a fake hotel. So here's a little bit out of the process of how we decide what we're going to release. We have a Slack channel that we sort of drop a lot of references in, and sort of people sort of put in, we saw this font, there's this new typeface designer out there who just graduated, let's sort of check them out. And then there's 2 basic phases that we go through in terms of deciding what we're going to release. And so it goes from discovery, so finding who's out there, we reach out to people, we have an internal discussion, we sort of internally debrief, and make sure that we think this is a good idea. We discuss as a group, and if we unanimously decide, we all agree this should be a part of the collection, then we move forward to submitting an offer to that type designer, a release plan. Usually it goes through some sort of form of revisions. We send it through mastering. If anyone's sort of a music person out there, a recording artist, it's sort of the same thing as mastering a song, and then we launch it. So one of those newer releases after the first 2 was designed by Emily Atwood, actually as a thesis project for a class that she was taking in New York. So very much sort of this broad-nibbed, musical notation-inspired typeface that she found, again, I think back into the 18th century, maybe even earlier, the way that musical notations were written, with this sort of broad-nib pen on top of a stenciled sort of format, could be combined to maybe create a typeface in and of itself. And so because the reference comes from music, it was called Etude and had 3 weights to it, light, regular, and bold. And it's great because, again, this sort of is a parallel to our systematic approach at Order, where there's a handful of pieces that really comprise the typeface, and you can combine them in different ways to make most letter forms. And so we were really intrigued by including this as a great contrast to the other typefaces that we currently had. So because it was influenced by a stencil, of course, we made one and then made sort of a fake Philharmonic. And then our 2 most recent typefaces, Vanity, which is sort of this octic, condensed chisel typeface, and Haltung, which is sort of an ode to universe, one of my favorites. So yeah, now we have 7 releases and 1 on the way. So really, let's see, I think we're on the 4th one. Now we're in the very last stage of this. 5 minutes ago. We can go over 6:30, right? I don't know. Okay, I think we have until 7, so almost there. So beyond the Foundry, then the next sort of path that I took, again, I'm not doing this all alone. There are many, many people and teams that I'm doing this with, but it's really thinking about bringing guidelines into their next era, which we think is digitally. So the last company I'm going to talk about is essentially a software company. So again, because we had learned, you can sort of see the progression here. These ideas maybe besides chip slip, don't just sort of like come out of thin air or sort of like happen randomly, but they really do build on one another. The Type Foundry comes out of doing, typefaces for clients. And then this company very much came out of re-releasing legacy guidelines from an era that we thought really had it right, and then bringing them forward into the future and really learning from them and building on them. I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. In fact, they're quite not, but something to learn for sure. So they started as, paper in 3-ring binders. We thought, there's definitely still things that we see here that we still do today. I mean, in guidelines that we create for brands, you'll have a page that looks identical to this. And then even though we do type scaling is pretty interesting. So then there's a book by Unit Editions in the UK called Manuals, and it is a book and a collection of different standards manuals, published around the same time we were doing our books. And so we thought there's so much here that we can sort of take and apply to the thinking of what we're currently doing, but certainly there is a way from printed guidelines and then going from PDFs, which are static and don't move and are really hard to update and distribute, into something a lot easier to use. But we started with the foundational work that has already been done through these legacy systems that really haven't changed that much. And so we started to notice, these reoccurring themes like tabbed pages and hole punches for pages just out of necessity, for the pure reason that, if a change was made, you could change that page, send it out, and then it would get put back in or replaced with that page that was then, incorrect. So we thought, out of all these devices, was there something that we could sort of take and then design, something for the future? So grids, tabs, all pretty common things that we all use as designers. This is called photo blue, which is essentially just invisible if you scan it. So that's why this is sort of visible beyond a lot of logos. And again, this comes from Architect Blueprints. Same, you guys get it. That's where it comes from. So then Standards was born. So we had this just very simple idea really coming out of the books, but also as we were designing the website for Order, we were building our own CMS backend system to the website, and we thought, surely we could do the same thing, but to build guidelines for our clients, purely for our own sake. So we had a few, goals, a mission, why we thought this was important. First and foremost was to replace the PDF. So, I don't know how many of you in here actually deal with these now, but out in the professional world, if you're delivering or you're working for a brand, a lot of the times those guidelines were given to you in PDF form. And I could just go on and on why that's difficult to use. So one of those things is that you can't download anything from it. And so giving the ability to download assets directly rather than emailing, you could easily distribute this website, and it was always up to date no matter if you went to it yesterday, tomorrow, a week from now, instead of re-exporting a PDF and then sending out to those people. It's like seems crazy when you think about the ways that those things are really distributed. And it needed design precision. So there were other products on the market that were similar, but they didn't allow you to design precisely what you needed to represent the brand that were encapsulated in the guidelines. So what I'm showing you now, no one has ever seen, which, just wait for it and it gets better. But these are the very first, literally the very first presentation we did internally on how we were going to design this thing. So if there are any product designers in here, just excuse this. This is like graphic designers trying to design an app, or like traditional graphic. I mean, I'm sure people educated now can just do both seamlessly. But this is us just figuring, okay, so what are the pieces that a sort of digital version of brand guidelines needs to have? So some sort of navigation, a very simple grid structure, buttons to allow you to do things. And this is what we just started to sketch on from the very, very start. And so something extremely simple, just giving space for people to drop things in. You needed zero code or development knowledge necessary to produce these guidelines. As you can see, we're riffing on the printed tabular device that we learned from those legacy guidelines, and just seeing how it could translate into a digital form. So the term WYSIWYG, this is what you see is what you get. That's basically what we wanted to develop. And literally, this is so crude, but like you want an image, you drop it here, and then you upload it. So just something that simple where anyone from a production designer to a formally trained graphic designer to a copywriter could still get in here and produce a pair of guidelines. So clearly it's gotten more complex, but just thinking about how fundamentally simple we can make it is what we were trying to explore. So hovering, getting the different elements of the guidelines that you might need, dropping it in, dragging over. So just doing some experiments with existing clients that we had. And this was just the birth of what would eventually become the product that we have now. So we've come a very long way. Now things are in motion. Now things are developed a little bit further where they still are those fundamental pieces of a brand guidelines like color palettes, type specimens, button styles, type styles, hierarchy, icon libraries, etc. And still rather simple, but just things that are useful and productive for people that need to make these very quickly and do it truly on a lower budget than it would cost to make a bespoke website of this same similar subject matter on your own. So I think I just had our designer put music to this morning, which I thought would be more enticing than just silence. But now the product from those blue boxes has now become this. Still blue boxes though. So to date, it's been a 4-year, the idea started in 2019, 4 years of development, 2 years that is publicly available where anyone can now subscribe, and it's a subscription-based service, and we've been lucky enough to get some really amazing brands and studios and agencies using this is, when you actually look at who has joined the platform, it's amazing to me that from, again, this very simple idea of, we're doing a CMS for our website, let's just make brand guidelines out of it, to some huge companies thinking that it's also a good idea. So this is what the website looks like now. You can go to the marketing site and see this. You can sign up for free. So this is the most current view of the products. All of these are an example of orders, projects, and different guidelines that we create for clients. So all of them in one place. This is what the editing platform looks like. So everything's based on a 12-column grid. If you're Figma users, it's a very similar structure to the way that Figma works. So you'd be able to get it very quickly. And look, that no photo blue made it all the way to the end. So we have included no templates, but we create automations. So all these different modules are preloaded suggestions on how to create color palettes or don'ts or type specimens, really just allowing you to get started a lot faster and cut out the time that you would need to do all of this from scratch. So you could literally create a guidelines in a day if you wanted to, or spend a month. And so this is an Albers, this one moves with your cursor, which is actually pretty fun, an Albers color chart, color palette. So fun things like that we can just work in, and you can use it or you don't have to. And then once you're finished, you click that red button and it publishes as a website, and then you're off to the races. You can send it to be downloaded, distributed, and really much easier to maintain than a PDF would be. So here's just a couple last examples. This one was just published by Major League Baseball, and really showing off, what you can do with a brand to make it look like that specific brand. I think one thing we were frustrated with using other products is you were sort of stuck to the way that product looked. And so this is very much a reflection of MLB's brand, their typefaces, everything that they use, and so is any other brand that is hosted on the guidelines. So these are just some fun animations that I thought would be nice to end with, and I think you sort of get the point. But I hope all of you can join for free and sort of poke around, and we give student discounts, education discounts, 50% off. So I'm sorry to sales pitch you during this, but just so you know. So yeah, just to sort of end this, you could really, I guess, say 4 years, but really the past 2 years, we have almost 30,000 active users. We're in 59 different countries. almost 19,000 followers on Instagram, and that means something, I guess. And we've never spent $1 on marketing. So use Instagram to your advantage. Whew, okay, we're at the end, I promise. Okay, so I just have 2 things to end in this TED Talky way. I'm not like an inspirational speaker, but if there are things to leave you with, I thought this might be useful. So the first one, just back to the very beginning, out of like starting design businesses and like why you should do it. If they're necessary, they could be necessary to you, to no one else. You can come up with that for yourself, but if you ask me, these are 3 reasons why I think you should. So some sort of, almost looks like a void, but a void needs filled. So there's a place in the market, in the world, in your community that could benefit from something existing. Again, in our case, we think digital brand guidelines and our very, very specific niche of graphic design is something that could be better, so we created it. So a void needs filled. Some sort of opportunity strikes. You find a historic guidelines in the basement of your workplace, and then you decide to make a book out of it. Do it. Or you're just deeply in love with something, and I think that's reason enough. And again, you can see how I've given evidence of no business experience, no paid marketing, sort of making everything up as we go. But if you really love something, other people will as well. And I think you're more likely to be successful than if you're just doing it purely for the money reason, or you could care less. So if you love something, just do it. Yeah, sounds cheesy, but it's true. The second one is, I really say this with great, I deeply believe it, that the people in this room, like when I speak to students or, design schools, people that have studied design, is that you really do have this superpower or an advantage, is that you have this decision-making capability that a lot of people, not really in business, but just in the world, just don't really have. But I think when you're in design school and in any of those disciplines, you're forced to make decisions. You just have to get to the next step. I think making decisions are really hard, but I think going through the things that you're learning is incredibly powerful. This is my number one superpower. I wasn't very good in school. Sorry, Mom, she doesn't like me to say this stuff if she's watching, but my grades weren't very good, but I sort of got to a point where I can make decisions very quickly, and that counts for something, it turns out. So being decisive and then taking advantage of what you're learning. Like, people will pay you hundreds of thousands of dollars for your services, and that's great, and you'll make a living and make money. But if you have an idea and you want to make it a reality, it's free because you already know how to do it. So whether it's designing a website, designing a building, designing a flyer, a brand, a logo, a book, you can do that where you will get hired to do it. But if you want to go out and make that your own thing, you have such an upper hand to most people. Just take advantage of it. Have a point of view. I think, what is this? Yeah, resist compromise. These things go hand in hand. I think having a point of view and sticking to it is very important. I don't think that means you shouldn't listen to what others tell you, but if you believe strongly, resist the urge to compromise too much. Okay, that's it. Thank you for having me. That's it. Cool. 9 minutes over. So I don't know who, we could take questions. I don't know what the next step plan would be, but happy to answer questions if people have them. Cool. Oh, yeah. Someone has to just ask a single, okay, great. Just get one started, yeah.
I'm sorry, but it's not a question. It's just a comment.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by your story of the 1966 redesign of the New York subway system, because one of the most important books in architectural history or architectural theory is Learning from Las Vegas. And looking into the history of it, one of the topics that Robert Venturi, who was part of that project, was really interested in is wayfinding in the subways in New York. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that it was part of a bigger context. Yeah, so thank you. So there's the connection between the history of design and the history of architecture.
Amazing.
That we just discovered. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, wayfinding is an architectural extension. So when we do wayfinding projects, we're hired by architects to do it. So yeah, they go hand in hand. I'll look that up.
Hi, I'm actually a design student here. I was wondering if you're going to hire someone post-grad, what do you look for in a designer?
You know, it's funny. The design part is almost like the easy parts. We get a lot of good portfolios, and things can look flashy and interesting and impressive. And sure, you should have that. But if we get someone who is passionately, clearly like ready to just dive in, go for it, and be helpful and supportive and just learn, I guess it's the worst thing you can do is have an ego or sort of just be cut off from trying things or jumping into things that might seem scary. And so anyone with that attitude of just ready to learn, jump in, figure things out, and just be helpful, like at an entry-level sort of position, that is an ideal candidate. And then, no typos on your resume. But truly, I think maybe that was my decisiveness I learned in design school. That was a direct lesson from my favorite design professor that I had. So it was that plus, I forget, I deleted something. It was something just like show up or just like be on time. It's like putting your name on the test. Like just being on time to the meeting, returning the phone call, returning the email, like that baseline stuff, so many people do not do, and it's crazy to me. And so I've gotten so far just by doing that stuff. So be a great designer, but then also do those other things. And yeah, that's what we look for. Yeah. Thank you for asking questions, by the way. Sometimes you just get silence and it's awkward, but okay.
Hi, I'm a senior student, graphic design student in here, and your works look really fresh and innovative. Can I ask, how do you push through creative blocks and keep coming with new ideas? And how do you catch the opportunity that came to you? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's too much to talk about. I probably even pushed it with all of this. But the one of the approaches that we have at Order is this sort of historical perspective. That's how we sort of frame it, but that doesn't mean that we're always trying to make a company look like it's from another generation or just always bring something old to make it look new. The point is that we're research-based, and so doing research and finding some sort of relationship to the thing that we're designing for into what it will eventually become is what we're trying to find. So, if you ask me, what is design? I just think design, it's relationships. That's what design is. It's a relationship to something else. Otherwise, it's maybe art, and we can have that debate afterwards. And that's also fine, too. I think an expression versus a relationship. So, I spoke went to a crit earlier to Julie's class, and we were talking about like margins and the way that they should have a relationship to one another. So the point is that we don't just get inspired out of the blue, but we try to find a relationship to something else, and then you can usually make a connection from that and then maybe modify it or add a separate relationship. It's like a very simple, math equation of 1 + 1 = 2, but it's like that color red plus this typeface that is pulled from some era in your company's history equals maybe a good path forward. So we don't just, I'll tell you, we don't create mood boards. We have a no mood board policy at our company, 0. If a client asks for it, we will politely say no, but instead we're going to show you a lot of research and why we're doing the things that we're doing and making proposals. Because we're not interested in trends, yada, yada. That's another whole talk in and of itself. But yeah, we just try to find relationships, and I think that can be found in a lot of different ways. There's not just one way to do it. Design research is not a singular path. It's not linear. But having reason for what you're doing typically leads to a good idea, I think.
I think that's a good place to end.
Cool.
Thanks
Well,
so much.
yeah, follow these things. You can email me, and thank you. Yeah. Cool.
Sweet.